keep hearing this about, $1 trillion of taxpayer money wasted. And, right here, the war in Afghanistan cost America $300 million per day for 20 years with big bills yet to come. And that number is from this week. So I've always said, no, taxpayer money didn't cover this $1 trillion boondoggle. And frankly, I think it was a lot more than $1 trillion. The Pentagon has, let's just say unique accounting, i.e. no accounting. It was a lot more than $1 trillion, folks. But I wanted to have you on to dispel the myth that this was $1 trillion in taxpayer money, and then connect it to everything we don't have in America that we easily could have. But before I do that, Steve, Colin has put together this handy dandy montage of, our intelligent corporate Democrats and corporate media, them, feeding us the birds and the bees on fiscal responsibility.
Free sounds wonderful. Who doesn't want to have free care? But the reality is, in order to finance this, people are going to have to pay more in taxes, in payroll taxes, in corporate income taxes, in order to fund this free care.
Explain where they're going to get $1 trillion a year. $1 trillion. I don't even know how many zeros it is. It's a big number.
Those numbers dramatically underestimate the increased spending associated with providing everybody free care.
If they got that through and by some miracle, there was an epiphany that occurred, and some miracle occurred that said, okay, it's passed, then you got to look at the cost. I want to know, how did they find the $35 trillion?
And when I hear you speak, I get really excited. But I remember that Trump excited his base with a promise to build a wall with no real plan to pay for it. Your plan for free college tuition and Medicare for all seems like a way to excite the Democratic base, but with no real plan to pay for it. Now, how is your position in your campaign different than what Donald Trump did?
Is that true? Did a study funded by the Koch brothers actually indicate that Medicare for all would save the American people trillions of dollars?
No. It's not true, at least not according to the author of the study. Now, while it's true that the Koch brothers have given millions of dollars to the Mercatus Center at George Mason University, and an AP investigation earlier this year suggested that the Koch brothers do have control and influence over the hiring and firing of professors, we should note, for whatever it's worth, the authors of this study said the Koch brothers did not influence them in any way.
But it is expensive. Who pays is very important. What are the benefits that come in there? So I would think that hopefully, as we emerge into the election year, the mantra will be more health care for all Americans, because there is a comfort level that some people have with their current private insurance that they have.
But my favorite part is when Jake Tapper says, misleading because the author says so. You mean the author of the right-wing funded study that, after being called out for his study showing savings, retroactively said, no, not true. So misleading. Anyway, Steve, I wanted to start with, let's be clear. We're not minimizing. A lot of people died. A lot of people, missing legs, other wounds from this war. You're also talking about the PTSD rampant in the American military, PTSD of Afghanistan citizens who had their country overrun by an invading force. So I don't want to just boil it down to dollars and cents, but on the dollars and cents, did taxpayer money pay for this? Again, it's not $1 trillion, but let's just use the number they give us. $1 trillion boondoggle in Afghanistan.
No, I mean, taxes literally had absolutely nothing to do with paying for any of this, from the hats the military wears, down to the boots, down to the knobs on the planes. Taxpayer dollars didn't fund a single nickel of this. And, this normally would piss people off just because they're so wedded to that idea that taxes fund federal spending. But it gets worse than that, because as you saw in that montage, they use this lie as a way of disciplining society, as a way of keeping us from asking for more. And as you see largely from the progressive movement and others, there's some movement. People are starting to understand that it's a lie, but they still fall back on, if we would have just not spent money there, we could have had that money to spend over here, or, you know, and the fact is that these are all keystrokes. I mean, literally, you're sitting there on a typewriter at the Fed and you're typing in digits into the Treasury's accounts, and the Treasury spends that money. It's not like some fat stacks that have been put on a pallet somewhere and they're just waiting for the government to spend. And you look in the vault and realize, oh crap, we're down to the last couple bundles, you know, Breaking Bad money over there. So we're going to have to print more money. It doesn't work that way. And so, while on one hand, the Afghanistan war was a tremendous waste of natural resources, waste of human labor, waste of human life, uh, all kinds of horrible things. It was never a quote unquote waste of money. See, you and I, when we spend money, we have this finite pool of money. And if we waste money, we can't eat the next day. However, when it comes to the federal government, it is literally, get all that nonsense about the Rothschilds out of your mouth, put it over here, and let's just focus for a minute that government checks don't bounce, period. And so the government has been spending money into existence since the dawn of time, really. But it's right here, right now, that people like us, activists, you know, economists that are what we call heterodox, are starting to get that message out there further and further and further, thanks to the great work of Stephanie Kelton in The Deficit Myth. If you haven't read it, I suggest you get it. And also, if you look to show the proof, to show the trajectory of gaining advancement, we even had John Yarmouth of, you know, I think it's the Senate Budget Committee, come out and say point blank, or was it House? I don't know. I'm not sure where he sits. But bottom line is, Yarmouth went out there on C-SPAN and gave a clinic on the fact that the government is not like your household. The government has the money, can do whatever, and regarding with healthcare even. So there are people that are getting this. Sadly, the activists in our community, all you got to do is put up one of these stupid memes on Facebook or Twitter that says something like, our hard-earned tax dollars paid for Donald Trump to go golfing, and they get a million people click it. Yeah, yeah. Or, I'm willing to pay more in taxes to have health care. Aren't you? When in reality, it's not necessary. It's virtue signaling with basically an ephemeral reality. It's vapor. It's a lie. It's a myth, like the coal in the stocking at Christmas time. So no,
Right.
absolutely no tax dollars went to funding the Afghanistan war.
One of the rare good stories they did something, I think it was last year, saying that literally military generals were mandated to spend this money daily. Doesn't matter on what, just spend the money. So how could those two things be true? How can it be that, you know, we gotta look under the bed and under the cupboard to find the money for the infrastructure, for expanding Medicare, this and that, but in Afghanistan, yeah, no, there's an unlimited money tree.
Well, I think I think the big thing to understand, and I hate to get esoteric, but we're going to bring it back for a minute. And it's like, you have two ways of getting money into the system, and only two ways. Number one is the federal government spends that money into existence and gets the economy going. It chooses where it spends that money. And the federal government has got a patriotic green card, if you will, to just go, go, go with the military. And so spending money into the economy to keep it floating, they use and do more than to enrich their friends, of course, but to keep the economy going, since social spending is such a taboo thing with even regular rank and file blue dog Democrats. And then you've got the Republicans who naturally just revile anything that looks like social spending. So you've got federal government spending, but then you've got this other thing, and that is bank lending. Bank lending is not the same thing as government spending, because what banks are doing is basically giving you an IOU denominated in the government's unit of account. When the government spends that money into existence, it doesn't have to be paid back. It's just money, right? That will circulate through the economy. But when you take out a bank loan, you've got to pay it back. And so when that bank loan is paid off, or when it's defaulted upon, It zero outs the reserves in the back end that created it to begin with, and it nets to zero. When the federal government spends it into it, that is called debt. So the national debt is nothing but the money supply. Okay. So if you think about this, going back to the 300 million, they got to spend it. They got to spend it. Part of it is number one, the way federal budgets work and the way government budgets in general work. If you're allotted a certain amount of money and you don't spend it, when they go to give you your budget the next time, they'll reduce it because you didn't spend the money they gave you. That's number one. Number two is because there's a reason for that money. It's not just what it looks like funding war. It's being used as a way of getting money into the economy. And until we can make social spending acceptable and not taboo and not welfare or not whatever, they're going to continue to use the military as the place to spend for the first resort. And so I think that this is a very important thing for your listeners and so forth to really begin to understand, is that the federal government spends money first onto something, and that's how it gets into the economy.